Right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's press conference with faith leaders and military advocates who are calling on Congress to pass the Veterans and Consumers Fair Credit Act. My name is Katie Thompson, and I am the program director at the Center for Public Justice, which is a member of the Faith for Just Lending Coalition. Today's press conference features faith leaders from Faith for Just Lending, an ecumenical coalition of faith-based institutions working to end predatory payday lending. We are also grateful to be joined by a representative from the Military Officers Association of America. As Congress continues to deliberate on the Build Back Better Act, we must not lose sight of the many families trapped in a cycle of predatory payday loan debt who are struggling to pay the bills, keep food on the table, and save for the next emergency. As we honor veterans this week, there's no better time to enact legislation that will protect veterans and all Americans from these harmful loan products. By taking advantage of loopholes and a weakening of traditional usury laws, payday lenders typically offer loans at 300% APR and higher to the 12 million consumers who use payday loans each year. The Veterans and Consumers Fair Credit Act, introduced in the Senate in July by Senators Reid, Brown, and Merkley, would extend the protections of the Military Lending Act, which caps payday loans, car title loans, and installment loans at 36% APR for active duty military service members, their spouses, and certain dependents, to veterans and all Americans. We're going to hear from a panel of speakers from both Faith for Just Lending, as well as the Military Officers Association of America. And I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and then I will come back to introduce each speaker after that, and we'll conclude with a time of brief question and answer from the audience. So first, we will hear from Reverend Dr. Willie Gable, who is the pastor of Progressive Baptist Church and chairman of the Housing and Economic Development Commission of the National Baptist Convention, USA, which is based in New Orleans. Dr. Gable is also former Airman First Class, U.S. Air Force.
Dr. Gable, you're muted.
One thing. All right. Now, thank you, Katie. Now that and thank you, Corey. Now that I'm unmuted, we want to first of all thank the Center for Public Justice and our Faith and Credit, Faith for Just Lending participants, but certainly for hosting this most important and quite necessary panel discussion on this issue. Yeah, I'm Willie Gable, and I do pastor a church. I'm really at the end of the pastoring. I've been doing that for 34 years, so I'm about to go out and pass the baton, but never stop doing the social justice work. As a leader in our National Baptist Convention, we've been at the forefront in our faith community fighting predatory lending. And it has been my honor to serve as that chairperson associated with various groups that are providing advocacy towards predatory lending. As Katie mentioned, I'm also a former military person. And I can quickly remember, I don't know if any of you who are listening ever heard of household finance. And household finance was that little agency right outside of the base. And I got a $500 loan from them. And that was the longest loan I ever had because it took a long time to pay it off. I actually was discharged from the military and still owed on that $500 loan. So I've had some experience in this particular area. And so we're here to solicit, first of all, explain the need for this particular act for Veterans and Consumer Fair Credit Act, I'm just a believer that what's good for the military is good for everyone. And therefore, it's egregious that individuals are having to pay 400%, my congregants, 400 and 500% on a loan. And I have, in fact, labeled this legalized loan sharking. I mean, and we call upon the Congress to step forward. It's not like they do not know. Their lobbyists have been to congressional individuals' offices every year, but we have an opportunity now to come together. And so what we need, you know who we are, you know why we're here. What we need from you, from the people, is to your voices to step up and support the Veterans and Consumer Fair Credit Act. We need the press to report upon it. And every week, I'll keep it at the forefront as hot news. And we need our politicians to think of all of the people who are being harmed by these egregious loans. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Dr. Gable. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Corey Titus. Mr. Titus is the Director of Veteran Benefits and Guard and Reserve Affairs at the Military Officers Association of America, located in Alexandria, Virginia. Mr. Titus is also a United States Army veteran.
Thanks, Katie, and thank you for our Faith for Just Lending Coalition partners for the opportunity to be here and speak on this important issue. Anytime we get the opportunity to sing the praises of the Military Lending Act, we absolutely jump at the opportunity. For those on the call that are not familiar with the Military Officers Association of America, or MOA, we are the largest military service organization and fourth largest veteran service organization. We became heavily involved in predatory lending in the early 2000s, given that the payday lending issue was so pervasive in the military. Dr. Gable shared his story about getting caught in the debt cycle, the debt trap, and every year, tens of thousands of service members were facing that exact same challenge. And Congress took action in the mid-2000s on a bipartisan basis and passed the Military Lending Act. And the impact that bill made was just nearly an overnight success. It's one of the most successful consumer credit protections that our country has passed. And what we found was that based upon some of these aid organizations, aid societies that the military has, they frequently helped service members get out of these types of predatory loans. And they saw over from when it was implemented to data in 2018, a 99% decrease in having to help service members with predatory loans. Giving service members the access to reasonable rates meant that they weren't trapped in the debt cycle. And what this ultimately meant was that they weren't losing their jobs, because every service member needs to maintain a security clearance. And when they can't do that, the military needs to separate them. That was tens of thousands of service members every year. That was ultimately costing our government millions of dollars to separate them. And the Military Lending Act stopped all that. While this is a tremendous success, we need to take this good policy and we need to expand it, because it's not protecting all Americans. Specifically within MOA's community, we are seeing that the reserve component is not covered, our veterans aren't covered, and our survivors still are not protected with these reasonable consumer credit protections. This is unjust, and we believe that this is something that Congress needs to take action, because the harm it's doing to our society is so great. This is something that doesn't, what's important about this is that this is disproportionately affecting veterans. What we see is that veterans who are taking out these loans at 6 times the rate of their civilian counterparts. And that is something that we urge Congress to take action and close this loophole. Ultimately, good policy should not just be reserved for the military, but banning these types of predatory products will help service members, veterans, and really all Americans. So thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Corey. Okay, next we will hear from Ms. Chelsea Sobolek, Director of Public Policy at the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission based in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Katie. I am Chelsea Sobolek. Like Katie said, here with the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. We are the public policy and ethics arm of the Southern Baptist Convention and represent about 15 million Southern Baptists and about 46,000 congregations throughout the US. I want to thank the Center for Public Justice for hosting this important event as we highlight our support for the Veterans and Consumers Fair Credit Act. We are grateful for Chairman Brown's leadership on this important issue, and we are honored to be a part of the Faith for Just Lending Coalition. The ERLC opposes unjust lending practices that exploit the vulnerable and are predicated on consumer loss and trap families in cycles of debt. Payday lending serves as a significant contributing factor to the economic struggles for many Americans. The practice of providing short-term cash loans at unreasonably high interest rates forces families and individuals to make really difficult financial decisions that are often impossible to recover from. Southern Baptists are opposed to predatory lending practices that target financially unstable people. Any lending practice that intentionally uses and exploits vulnerable individuals is unacceptable and should be strictly regulated by government protections. We believe that Scripture offers guidelines for us as we think through honorable lending and borrowing practices. We are instructed not to take advantage of the weak. We are instructed not to charge usurious interest. In Leviticus 25, Scripture instructs us that if your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself with you, you should support him as though he were a sojourner, and he should live with you. Take no interest from him or profit, but fear God that your brother may live beside you. We are also instructed to seek the good of others. In Luke, we're told to love our enemies, do good, lend, accept nothing in return, and our reward will be great. A business that leaves most of its customers worse off than before does not contribute to the common good. The average interest rate on payday loans in the US is 391%. This high cost lending often traps families in cycles of debt that leave already impoverished families with crippling debts, like some of my other panelists have referenced. The payday lending industry exploits individuals in financially desperate situations. Like my colleague referenced, the Military Lending Act prohibits loans exceeding an interest rate of 36% to active duty military members, and the Veterans and Consumers Fair Credit Act would extend those same protections to all Americans, including veterans and military families. This important legislation provides a federal interest rate cap at 36% for all Americans. There are currently 19 states in the District of Columbia, where I live and work, that have already implemented these interest rates protections to prohibit federal or predatory loan lenders from exploiting vulnerable Americans. We swiftly urge Congress to pass this important bill so that all Americans will be protected and will have a chance at a financially stable future that is that predatory lenders will not be a part of. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chelsea. Next, we're joined by Reverend Gabriel Salguero, President and founder of the National Latino Evangelical Coalition and pastor of the Gathering Place, based in Orlando, Florida.
Thank you, Katie, and thank each of you for taking time this week in particular, as we celebrate the service of veterans and their families. We want to first express a heartfelt thanks for all those who have served and their families and those who are serving still. You may ask why the National Latino Evangelical Coalition has joined the Center for Public Justice and Faith for Just Lending and MOA and so many others to call for the passage of the Veterans and Consumers Fair Credit Act. As you've heard from some of our fellow panelists, the Military Lending Act passed with strong bipartisan support. This is a bipartisan legislation that makes sense in 2006. Now we're calling for an extension to cover all veterans and other citizens. And the reason I'm doing it and why it's important to me is that 16% of the military force in America is Hispanic. 18% of US Marines are Latino or Latina. This is particularly true in my congregation in Orlando, Florida, where we have multiple veterans who we have one of the largest VA hospitals actually across the street from my house. And I see them almost every day when I do visits. Both my grandfathers are veterans and multiple uncles and aunts actually have served in the military. So this is very close to home, both as a grandson of veterans and a pastor of veterans. And this is a question about the nation's moral ledger. Not just the fiscal ledger, but the moral ledger. What protections do we guarantee for those who are willing to pay the highest sacrifice with their lives and their families? And what does it mean that predatory lending is almost at 400% for some of the most vulnerable people? For us, this is a scriptural issue. Deuteronomy 23 reminds us that we should not charge exuberant usury or interest, and that we should not exploit the poor and the vulnerable. And so both as a pastor, as a family member of veterans, and as a person who understands the impact on families that predatory lending has when people are paying a loan that should not take, as Reverend Dr. Gable has told us, multiple years and entrap them and their families, particularly children, in a cycle of debt. It's important for us as faith leaders to say, we as a nation can do better and must do better. And that's why we're urging all our elected officials to pass this, because, I mean, to cap it at 36% APR, could you imagine how many people we're helping buy monthly groceries? How many people we're helping not be evicted from their homes? How many people we're helping make ends meet? So as the nation seeks to invest in infrastructure, as it seeks to invest in early childhood education, we should remember the most vulnerable, our veterans and our consumers who have for years been exploited by predatory lending. And that's why the National Latino Evangelical Coalition has joined the Center for Public Justice, and our colleagues from all of these faiths at the Faith Just Lending and MOA to say, now's the time to act without any delay. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Reverend Salguero. Next, we will hear from Reverend Sakina Hamlin, who is the Minister for Economic Justice with the United Church of Christ in Cleveland, Ohio.
Thank you so very much, Katie, for hosting us, and the Center for Public Justice for your commitment to this issue as a fellow believer. Thank you also to MOA, as well as the millions of veterans that have served this country faithfully. I am honored to know that my father is one of those. My uncles and aunts are some of the veterans as well. And so we thank you for your service. The United Church of Christ is committed to helping to create a just world for all. We believe strongly in Jeremiah 29:11 that states that God's vision for us is for us to have a future and a hope. Our military service members truly sacrificed all of themselves for the protection of us. They sacrificed themselves with the promise of a hope of coming back as veterans to a life where they would be honored and respected. However, though they had protections with the Military Lending Act as active duty service members, we neglect to protect them from predatory bad financial actors as veterans, and this must stop. And beyond that, the future and hope that God calls us to ensure is for our veterans, but also for our non-military families. So therefore, as a United Church of Christ, we stand with this coalition and ask that the protections of the Military Lending Act be extended by passing the Veterans and Consumer Fair Credit Act. Now, the United Church of Christ is a part of this robust coalition, a coalition that is extremely theologically diverse, but yet we stand on the principle that you should not rob the poor just because they are poor. Another principle, as outlined in our Faith for Just Lending Coalition statement, is one in which every denomination or Christian organization says that we will teach and model responsible stewardship and help our neighbors in times of crisis. We, the United Church of Christ, we have done that. It's evidenced by our partnership with RIP Medical Debt, where we have to date abolished $71.2 million in medical debt and counting. This is important because a study by this very coalition, Faith for Just Lending, as well as several studies by the National Consumer Law Center, found that borrowers often have extreme medical debt and look to payday lenders to help them get rid of that debt. However, as they go to payday lenders, they find themselves even more in a vicious cycle of debt that robs them of their hope, their dignity, and yes, their future. In addition to that principle, we join with this great coalition, Faith for Just Lending, in stating even that as we model responsible stewardship, we as a United Church of Christ and our UCC Pension Board are in the final stages of acting upon a 2017 resolution of our denomination to support and create credit unions as a responsible stewardship model that does not prey upon the poor just because they are poor. We are in the final stages of that, and our team that has entered into this cite wholeheartedly that the reason, or one of the reasons why we have this credit union is because of the bad financial products that are in our financial spaces, and because that families find themselves in a cycle of debt. Again, we hold to another principle of this great coalition, and that is that while we as communities of faith do our part in making sure our neighbors have the financial resources that they need in times of crisis, we do recognize that the government must do its part to make sure that usury is prohibited and predatory and deceptive lending practices are eliminated. We're doing our part. We need the government now to do theirs. So therefore, think of it like this. We as communities of faith, denominations, our churches have been lending justly. We have been helping people when they don't have enough cash to fix their car. We've been trying to create systems and situations where they would not need to go to predatory payday lenders. However, it's much like the old adage, you can't keep pouring water into a bucket that has a hole in it. And certainly the loopholes in this financial system are such that that which we are doing in good faith as a community of faith and communities of faith keep going right out the bottom of the bucket. Congress, you must fix the bucket. You must fix the hole. You owe it to families to seize upon this moment and relieve the debt burden of predatory payday lending. Pass this bill.
Thank you, Reverend Hamlin. I'm going to open it up now for a time of Q&A with our panelists. So please send any questions you have in the chat. I'll kick us off with one that we received, and anyone can jump in. Why do you think this bill will help all Americans, and why is it Congress's job?
And I think an important thing to recognize with anybody that takes out a predatory lending is they're called payday loans. They're meant to be a short-term loan that helps get you through to the next payday. But the reality is that couldn't be further from the truth. You see these loans get rolled over month after month, taking more and more money out of an individual's, a family's pockets. And the ramifications for that impact every aspect of their lives. And they're in the end worse off than if they would have never taken the loan and found another way to cover those costs. And ultimately that's less food or less money in their pocket for food, taking care of their family, paying other bills. And it's not just, it's tens of thousands of people every single month that are in that situation. So this is really an investment back in those that the lives of those that need help the most.
In addition, Katie, what we have here is something that we know is egregious. Anytime one makes a loan and does not require some kind of validation as to the ability to pay back the loan, something is up. But I'm not asking you, can you pay it? I'm just going to give it to you. That ought to be a red flag. And to be more specific to, I think, the question, the government's role is that we did not have payday lending until after 1985. They came in, saw an opportunity, and to much of our chagrin, they have been lobbying very strongly within our state to keep their business practice there. So Congress really has an opportunity to make a difference. Consumer Protection Bureau made a step, made an effort, but it did not go all the way.
Thank you, Dr. Gable. Next question, seeing here, particularly for our clergy, Reverend Hamlin or Dr. Gable, could you share how you've seen predatory lending perhaps impact your congregants and your congregations, your communities, and how that has impacted your congregation's suffering for those under payday loan debt?
Well, one thing that I found is that, first of all, we didn't know that we were supplementing payday lenders. We were providing, as good stewards, we were providing services to members who came and non-members. And only as we dug deeper did we find out that it was a payday loan that we were subsidizing. And because of payday loans, they were, as Chelsea said, that they were not able to pay just regular bills, because if you know anything about how the industry works, they are the ones who get to your check first. And so they take the money out before you get to it. And when you go to your checking account, there's no money. And I'd like to just say this, and Sister Hamlin will probably have more, is that payday lending is not for those who don't work. You cannot have a You can't get a loan unless you have a bank account, a checking account. So this notion that people who are getting payday lending, getting payday loans are those who are slothful, who are lazy, etc. That is far from the truth. These are everyday people, police officers, nurses, hard workers.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Gable. I do echo all of those sentiments. I will lift up a couple of things. And all of this actually intersects with what he just spoke of in terms of, we're not talking about people who are not working. We're not talking about people who are not banked. Now, one of the results often is that they become unbanked because of the cycle of debt. And when you have someone hitting your account over and over, and then also in addition to that, the loan having to be flipped over and over again, then what ends up happening is you just have so many fees, and often your account has to be closed and you become unbanked. And so it's, the great American dream in terms of us being able to move forward. Families are then not able to seize the dream that we talk about, and then ultimately end up falling back. I'll lift up a couple of things, and I'll start with as recent as about a month ago. I am not currently pastoring a local congregation as of about 6 weeks ago, where I was serving on an interim basis in addition to this ministry with the United Church of Christ. However, about a month ago, I did have someone to send an email thanking us for the work that we've done to abolish medical debt, as well as saying that they found themselves in a cycle of debt because they had so many medical bills, and then they tried to pay them off with payday loans. And that person talked about how ultimately, while they may not have the medical debt because they had a chronic problem that continued, they still had the payday loans. Another instance I will lift up, as Dr. Gable so rightly brought in, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There was a time when the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was actually doing the work that it is assigned to do, protecting consumers. And they were holding bad actors accountable for the bad things that they do in our free market. And I had a member who pulled me to the side after preaching one day. And she said that she wanted to thank me because she knew the work that we were doing to hold payday lenders accountable. And she said that the work that the CFPB was doing then, that sought to return billions of dollars back to consumers that were illegally taken by predatory lenders, among other people, but in this case, predatory lenders. She said, my mom was one of the ones affected. And she got a letter about that. And I told her of the work that you and other faith leaders are doing. So I just wanted to thank you. And the last thing that I would lift up is something that perhaps my colleagues have heard me talk about before, and that's just this. Payday lenders target historically marginalized communities. They target financially vulnerable communities as well. I was presenting to a group of Black churches in Kentucky. And we were talking about predatory payday loans. Kentucky, unfortunately, does not have a rate cap. And as I was talking, somebody brought me a cup and it had the emblem of a payday lender on it. The payday lender sought out this Black church convention to sponsor it so that it could supply those in attendance with cups, with lanyards, with all these things that had their phone number as well as their website. Now, in the same state, the predominantly white group of churches of the same denomination did not have the payday lender even approach them. So I have seen many things, and that's why we're in this fight together to end predatory payday lending.
Thank you, both Reverend Gable and Reverend Hamlin. Chelsea, go ahead.
I will be quick, but I will just highlight for our congregants, access to capital, families that do not have savings, something as seemed minor as a parking ticket, a car breakdown, an unexpected medical bill, those families that don't have savings, that is kind of the trigger for them to go to use these payday lenders. So I think it's important to highlight the very human humanity of this situation, because these are real families, trying to take care of their children and extended families and loved ones, and something quite minor, unfortunately, could be the catalyst into this. So I think it's important to highlight that access to capital for those families.
Thank you, Chelsea. We have time for one more question that I want to address, and that's regarding the 36% rate cap, which the Military Lending Act currently has the 36% rate cap, and the Veterans and Consumers Fair Credit Act would then extend that protection to our veterans and to all Americans. Could one of our panelists or several comment on that 36% rate cap and whether or how we might respond to those who have a concern that it's too high?
What happened years ago when we first started in this area, I thought 36% was too high also. So I agree with that person. But we found out in working with various state legislators, as well as congresspersons, that the 36% was an agreed upon amount. But, and the reason we in the Faith for Just Lending Coalition, as well as the Faith for Credit Roundtable of CRL, we agreed to accept the 36% and to work with that, because that's better, far better than 391%. So anything that we can get below those numbers is what we agreed to do, because it's better. It's not perfect, but it's better. So I certainly want to thank Senator Brown, who's been in the fight, even when they did not have control of the banking committee, when Reverend Senator Shelby had it. But we've been trying to at least, even it's 36%, which is higher than a credit card rate. But we're willing to take 36% under the Extended Military Lending Act. That's so important to get that legislation passed. That's critical to this country. And I can't see how elected officials who say how much they love the Lord and how much they love America, how can you not step up and say, okay, the maximum amount you can charge for these loans that harm us and harm our communities. Billions of dollars taken out of the community every year, that you cannot support that.
Thank you, Dr. Gable. Great. Okay. like we have one more question in the chat. Okay, I'm going to ask for any of our panelists, what can we do to help with the fight and show support?
Sign up and join us. Contact your legislators. Contact your congresspersons. Get a group together. Make weekly calls. Let them know about this particular act right now that you and your clubs, your circles, whatever it is, your ministry groups, and in your churches, they can contact Senator Brown, other members who are on the committee, so that this can be passed both in the House and in the Senate.
Thank you, Dr. Gable. One last question I'll ask here for maybe Reverend Hamlin. How can people and organizations get involved with RIP medical debt and other similar organizations?
Sure, I was actually typing a response to that. But in terms of RIP medical debt, they're actually in the midst of launching a new church campaign right now. And I'm happy to get folks in contact with the right staff person at RIP Medical Debt. Right now, we're going to be a part of helping to launch that and to help abolish all of the debt currently, because this is buying a debt on the secondary market, all the debt currently in Ohio. We mentioned Senator Brown. We're so thankful for his efforts. But it should be noted that Ohio did change their payday laws of small dollar lending. However, it is not a solid 36%. Often there are fees and other things associated that makes it a reform, but it does not completely abolish it. And so then therefore, RIP Medical Debt even realizes that they have to do more than just paying off debts. We have to be a part of changing the system. And they themselves at their conference last year also introduced the fact that they have a public policy position now. Because God's people are not meant to be trapped in cycles of debt. And so while I will lift up efforts to do the direct service and the mission work of relieving those debts, and we do that, I will also lift up again that other principle that Faith for Just Lending stands on, in terms of that the government must be held accountable and do its part so that we can stop the cycle. So I'll put my email in the chat for you, Evan.
Great, thank you, Reverend Hamlin. Okay, I'm going to close our time together. I want to thank all of our attendees who have been with us. And I also want to give a special thank you to our panelists, including Reverend Salguero and Mr. Titus, who had to leave early. And especially a thank you as we again celebrate Veterans Day this week to Dr. Gable and Mr. Titus, as well as the family members of those mentioned on our panel, and to all veterans. We thank you for your service. So again, we thank you for attending. We urge you as attendees to speak out and contact Congress, urge them to pass the Veterans and Consumers Fair Credit Act this month. So we thank you again for your attendance. If you would like a recording of this webinar, we will circulate that to all those who have registered. And you can also learn more about Faith for Just Lending at lendjustly.org. Thank you so much.